So let's get started. So I want to continue with another question. And so the normal Parsha Zachor requirement, the way that we fulfill it, is by reading Parsha Zachor, which is found at the end of Kitetse, right? At the end of in source 1, we saw that text last time, the classic Zachor is Asher Asalcha Amalek, and then it ends off with Lo Tishkach. So there's a question which the Achronim deal with, and this is first discussed by the Magen Avram, which is, okay, so I know that I should listen to Parsha Zachor, but let's say I miss Parsha Zachor, right? Let's say, I don't know, there's coronavirus in 2020 or something like that. So a bunch of people don't hear Parsha Zachor when we normally read Parsha Zachor. When I get around to Parshas Beshalach, which by the way is this week's Parsha, very apropos, can I just read that with intention to fulfill Parsha Zachor, right? Why? What's at the end of Parsha Zachor? At the end of Parshas Beshalach. The end of Parshas Beshalach is the actual story of Amalek attacking, right? So at the
Purim laning.
Exactly, right. Or Purim laning, which regularly happens right after we do Parshas Zachor. So the Purim laning and also this week's Parshas laning, can I just have in mind, this is going to fulfill my chiyuv of Parshas Zachor. Now this is the story of what happened, and Parshas Zachor, which we regularly read, tells you, remember that which happened. Right, so we don't need to go through the whole thing, right? But by Avo Amalek, Vailachim Yosab Fidim, they attacked us, and then we have the whole the story with Moshe's arms get weak, etc. Yoshua weakens them, and then Hashem says to Moshe, I'm going to destroy Amalek from underneath the heavens. But even Moshe Mizbeach, he builds a Mizbeach, etc. And this last, hard to translate pasuk, Bayomer Kiyad al Keska Milchama la Hashem ba'Amalek midor dor. We're going to have an eternal war with Amalek. But that's the story of Amalek itself. So if I read that parsha, am I yotze the mitzvah of Zechiras Amalek? Any thoughts?
Well, there's no mention in the reading of Zechira. It just says to wipe them out. Right. That we should wipe them out, but there's no discussion of Zechira. Like
there's no imperative here.
Right. It does say there's no imperative of wiping them out. That's true, and we'll get back to that. There is a slight language of Zechira, right? Ksov zos zikaron b'sefer. Write this down as a memory in a sefer. V'sim be'oznei Yoshua, and give it to Yoshua that ki machoem chez zecher Amalek. I'm going to go and destroy the memory of Amalek mitachas hashamayim. So there is mention of destruction of Amalek, and there is some sort of mention of Zechira, but I think you pointed out that there's no mention of us destroying Amalek.
Yeah, it says Mocha Emcha, like Hashem is going to do it, not us. Yeah. Beautiful.
Okay, so let's get back to that. I'm going to hold off on that, and we'll ask a different question, which is as follows: that if you look in source 10a over here, so the Sefer HaChinuch has a line. The question is, right? Let's just speak outside. Are women chayavos in the mitzvah of Zechiras Amalek? Right. So what are the classic reasons why you'd say a woman is p'tura?
Mitzvahs aseh zman grama.
Okay, so is Parshas Zachor mitzvahs aseh zman grama?
No.
Right. Anyone object to that? Okay, good. Right. Parshas Zachor is you have to remember it. Not necessarily is there a specific time where you have to go and remember this, and so it's not a time-bound mitzvah. Presumably, it seems to be a either we'll get to exactly when or how often you have to hear it, but it's not like on Tuesday the 4th you have to go and remember Amalek. It's a more general mitzvah. So you'd think women are chayavos. However, there's this Sefer HaChinuch, which creates a little bit of a tumult. The Sefer HaChinuch writes the Sefer HaChinuch at the end of every mitzvah. So he just goes through who is chayav and who is pater from this mitzvah. So he says, this is in the end of in Parshas Kitetse, mitzvah Tafresh Gimel. He says, "V'no heges mitzvah zu b'chol makom, b'chol zman." It applies no matter where you live, no matter what generation you live in. B'zcharim. It applies to men only. The mitzvah of remembering Amalek. Ki lahem la'asos hamilchama when it comes to oyev. Why? Because they are the ones who are supposed to be waging the war and taking revenge against the enemy. Lo l'nashim. Women aren't the ones who go to war. Men go to war. So because men go to war and women don't go to war, therefore the mitzvah of remembering Amalek only applies to men and not to women. The Sefer HaChinuch says this. He gives no source for it. He doesn't generally give too many sources for things, but it seems like a curveball, something out of left field. So Minchas Chinuch, in fact, asks, if you look at the Minchas Chinuch over there, he says, "Umashikasav ki lahem la'asos hamilchama below lanashim." That which he said that only men have to do war and not women. He says he's got 2 points. Number one, be'emes milchemes mitzvah. When it comes to a milchemes mitzvah, a war that we're obligated in, the Gemara says, "Hakol yotzin afilu kala michupasa." That the Gemara says explicitly, everyone goes out to war, even a kala from her chuppah. Right? So it sure sounds like women are going to get involved in this war over here. And that's what the Rambam says, Kan. Gam amad besod Hashem yisbarach. Also says the Minchas Chinuch, who told the Sefer HaChinuch God's secret, im hatam mechamas hanekama, that the reason for this mitzvah is for revenge, meaning remembering Amalek is so that we take revenge. The efshar gzeres hakasuv, maybe it's just the Torah tells you there's a mitzvah. Sheniz korsi naso me'izetam, that we have to remember to hate Amalek, but not necessarily that that's connected to their destruction. And we have no idea. So how can the Sefer HaChinuch assume a reason for the mitzvah and then apply that reason to go and create a Torah for women? Maybe even when Mashiach comes and we finally wipe out Amalek, and they're no longer going to have a memory, maybe still the mitzvah of Zechiras Amalek will exist. So how on earth did the Sefer HaChinuch say that we are patur, that women are paturos from this mitzvah? And he says, Minchas Chinuch disagrees with the Sefer HaChinuch. He says it makes more sense to say that women are going to be chayavos in this mitzvah. Right, so to summarize, he's got 2 questions on the Sefer HaChinuch. Number one, you're against a Gemara. It says that even the Kala goes and is Yotzei Michupasa, so the women do get involved in the war. And number 2, just because they're involved in even if it were true that women aren't supposed to go to war, how do you know that the mitzvah of Zechira is fundamentally connected to the mitzvah of Mechia, of wiping out Amalek? Those are the 2 questions which the Minchas Chinuch asks. So the first question is maybe a little bit more, not as relevant, but just an interesting one, which is how do you get around the fact that the Gemara says that afilu kala yotzeis mechupasa, right? Did the Sefer HaChinuch forget a Gemara which says that the woman's going to go and that the kala is going to go leave her chuppah, presumably to go to war. So I saw over here also a very interesting answer of the Radbaz. The Radbaz says no, you misunderstood. It's not that the kala has to leave her chuppah to go to war. It means that the husband, the chassan, of course, he has to go to war. And what, you want the kala just to sit there under the chuppah waiting for her chassan who's not coming around? Oh, she's going to leave her chuppah because there's no point. She's going to be there all alone. But it's not that she actually has to go to war. So fine. So that first point, there's ways of getting around. I'd say that's not the simplest read of that text. That the kala leaves her.
But isn't there something that Milchemes Mitzvah that they both misapkos Mozon Umayim or something? That they
right. Very good.
They still have to participate. So
Right.
It's not as if they're totally scot-free.
Right. So the Rabaz raises that, and the Rabaz says maybe that was the minhag, but not that was a requirement. Meaning the women would try and help their husbands because that's an appropriate thing to do when your husband's at war, but not that was an obligation for them to go to war and help out.
But Rabbi, you could say it's 2 mitzvos, right? You could say it's 2 separate mitzvos, one for Zechira and one to wipe them out, right? You could say it's 2 separate mitzvahs. The women are mechayev in the Zechira mitzvah, but they're not mechayev in the wiping them out mitzvah.
Right, exactly. Meaning that's a question on the Sefer HaChinuch, right? That's basically what the Minchas Chinuch is asking on the Sefer HaChinuch. How can you tell me that because they don't have to wipe out, Amalek, that they're going to be patur from the Zechira? Maybe those 2 things have nothing to do with each other.
Is it 2 separate mitzvahs? Is it 2 separate mitzvahs? Or is it 1 mitzvah?
Good. So that's really the crux of the question, right? This machlokas, the Sefer HaChinuch and the Minchas Chinuch, what's really behind it? Exactly what Steve's saying, which is this mitzvah of Zechiras Amalek, is it tied, inherently to Mechias Amalek? It's definitely, let me back up.
But we would know that because the Sefer Chinuch will either characterize it as one or two mitzvot. What does he actually do?
Right. So excuse me. So he does count it as two separate mitzvos, as does the Rambam, as two separate mitzvos. But let's look back at one of our sources, actually at the Rambam. The Rambam counts it as two separate mitzvos, one to remember and one to destroy. But if you look back at the Rambam, when he characterizes the mitzvah of remembering, he says, what's the reason why we have to remember? So this is in source 4 over here. He should sivanu lizkor masha asalanu Amalek b'akdimo lehara lanu, that we have to remember what Amalek did to us. L'sno so b'chol eis v'eis. Why? Uneorer hanefashos b'ma'amarim l'hilachim bo. We have to rev people up to want to go and fight against them. Meaning the Rambam categorizes this as a separate mitzvah from the milchama, but he says the point of this mitzvah is in fact to get people to develop a hatred for Amalek so that they will then go ahead and destroy them. So the Sefer Chinuch is not alone in thinking that this mitzvah is intertwined with the mitzvah of Mechias Amalek. That was also clear from the Rambam. I'm sure that there's other Rishonim who say the same point. So it's not out of left field that the Sefer Chinuch thinks that one mitzvah and the other are connected. So fine. So let's go. Yeah.
How does the idea of a milchemet mitzvah and the ability of a chassan to be exempt for that for his first year, how does that all play into the actual mitzvah relating to Amalek?
You're asking that regularly there's a tour.
There's an exemption for the chatan.
So I believe that exemption is only for milchemes rishos. That if we have a war which isn't required, then the chassan is.
But a milchemet mitzvah that does not allow
even the chassan is going to have to leave his chuppah and get out there to the battlefield. And then maybe the kala has to help out. Maybe she doesn't. That seems to be a point of debate here between the Sefer HaChinuch and the Minchas Chinuch. So let's get back to our original question, right? So we brought up a moment ago, can you be Yotze the mitzvah of Zechiras Amalek by reading the text of what actually happened? Right? So now with this background of the Sefer HaChinuch and the Minchas Chinuch, so we now have maybe the tools to go ahead and answer that question. Right? So the Magen Avraham says, yes, you can go ahead and you can fulfill your obligation. Just read that parsha, read the parsha at the end of B'Shalach, this week's parsha, and you'll fulfill your mitzvah. And the Aruch HaShulchan gets all upset at him, and we can look at the Aruch HaShulchan inside over here. The Aruch HaShulchan says, it can't be. Why can't it be? So it says the Aruch HaShulchan, sorry for all the scrolling, in 10c over here, right? V'yesh misha omer, the yotzing min haTorah gam b'kriya de Purim, the parshas Vayavu Amalek, right? So the Magen Avraham says that if you just read Vayavu Amalek, this week's parsha, what we read on Purim, you will fulfill your mitzvah of Zechirat Amalek. Uleanios daiti eino kain sharei harambam b'sefer mitzvos ba'asin kuf peiches kasav shtzivanu lahachri Zechirat Amalek uve mitzvah kuf peites kasav shtzivanu lizkor mashas alanu Amalek ayin sham. So it says that you have to go and there's one command to go and destroy Amalek, and there's another one which says you have to remember what Amalek did to us. See there. V'zen nizkor rak b'parsha Zachor is asher asalacha Amalek v'ayah b'aniach timche. Okay, I apologize. This is not as clear as I thought it was when I read it. So here's the point which I wanted to emphasize over here, that in the parsha Vayavo Amalek, it doesn't say explicitly that Klal Yisrael has to remember it. That was one point which everyone made, and it doesn't mention that we have to go and destroy them either. I'm going to destroy. God is speaking. I'm going to destroy. It doesn't say you have to destroy them. Cain. The Mishnah Berurah also makes the second point. The Mishnah Berurah points out that it doesn't say anything about destroying Amalek. Right? So what's this machlokas? Now we can understand the machlokas Magen Avraham and the Aruch HaShulchan. What's behind that machlokas about whether or not you can fulfill the mitzvah with Vayavu Amalek? Or let me put it this way: how essential is the mechia, the destruction of Amalek, to this mitzvah? right? So what Rav Asher, yeah, go for it.
It's interesting that the Rambam puts the Mechia before the Schia in terms of his numbers.
That is very interesting. That is very interesting. Yeah.
I think he'd want to do the opposite.
Yeah. Timcheh Zecher
Put the Schira first, and then the Mechia.
Right. That's interesting. I didn't note that. That's a good point. So I'll just tell you what Rav Asher Weiss knows.
So it depends. Like if they're like really independent mitzvahs, you would hold one way. Like if they're independent mitzvahs, like Zachor and the Timcha are really independent, or is the whole reason the Zachor to do the Zachor because of the Timcha? Like almost like if there is no Timcha, like there's almost no Zachor.
Right. Or I think what you're saying is that if the Zechira requires you, if the point of the Zechira is so that you do the Mechia, right? So then you would have to say the specific text in case Kitetse, which talks about destroying them. But if the mitzvah is just a standalone mitzvah, remember what they did. So if we tell over the story of exactly what they did, that seems to be a perfect way of fulfilling your mitzvah.
Right, but we could apply the Minchas Chinuch's approach to how he analyzes mitzvah. So you can say, okay, what's the case of the 13-year-old boy? He's not obligated to go to war, but he's obligated in mitzvah. Is he obligated for that? So I mean, you can use those kinds of examples using Minchas Chinuch's methodology to kind of figure out how to distinguish.
That's very interesting. You're saying maybe there's other nafkaminas of the Sefer HaChinuch, let's say anyone who's not obligated in war, like someone below 20, maybe.
That's my point, exactly.
So that's interesting. I didn't see that, but that's a very interesting point. So Rav Asher Weiss basically though makes what Steve's point is, which is that the machloket, the Sefer HaChinuch and the Minchat Chinuch, right? The Sefer HaChinuch thinks that it's clear that these mitzvahs are intertwined, and the Minchas Chinuch thinks no, these mitzvahs have nothing to do with each other. Just remember is one mitzvah, what they did, and then another separate mitzvah to go and destroy them. That same machlokas about how intertwined the Zechira is with the Mechia is the same machlokas between the Magen Avram and the later Achron. That the Magen Avram, who thinks I can use any parsha, he thinks like the Minchas Chinuch, that these mitzvahs have nothing to do with each other. So as long as I remember what they did, that's good enough. However, the Aruch HaShulchan, the Mishnah Brura, who say, what do you mean you didn't mention anything about destroying them? They're assuming like the Sefer HaChinuch, who assumes that there's this interrelation between the Zechira and the Mechia. Maybe just getting back to women, in the Jewish Center is on Parshas Zachor, is the women's section packed?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, good. So that's wonderful. That's a mitzvah deoraisa. So going back to that machlokas, there happens to be a whole discussion about which way we paskin. The Chazon Ish and Rav Moshe are quoted as saying the minhag is that women are pturos, the women don't come to shul, they don't do Parshas Zachor, and then the Minchas Yitzchak says that they're chayavos. Of course, that's the minhag in Yerushalayim. There seem to be two different minhagim about whether women are makpidot about this, about coming to shul. In all of the modern Orthodox shuls I've gone to, it seems that the minhag is that women are makpidot about this, and even if they're not chayavot, they get a mitzvah, so it's a good idea. Can't hurt. But in other communities, that's not necessarily the case. So it's still an unresolved machlokas. There's two different minhagim, and whatever people do, we're good with that. Okay, good. So that was part one. Basically, are these two mitzvahs one interconnected, or are they not? There is I hope that my child's on you can't hear on the Zoom. If you can, he's making funny sounds. Wonderful. Good. Are we good moving on from that point, or any questions?
But how do we paskin as far as being Yotzei this Shabbos or not?
Beautiful. So the way we paskin is basically that we really try hard not to go and rely on this Magen Avraham. But in cases where there's a real Shas Chak, we'll rely on it. So for instance, during coronavirus, that was actually one of the cases. So Rav Shechter paskined, for those who missed, I forgot exactly which weeks we missed, but Parshas Zachor was one of the weeks which a lot of people miss. Whatever. Also, if you're just in quarantine, let's say you're in quarantine during Parshas Zachor, and you're in quarantine during Purim, so you're gonna miss the you'll be out of quarantine during Purim. Whatever. Let's say you miss Parshas Zachor. So ideally, we'll tell you wait until Parshas Kiseitze, right? Wait until we get to Parshas Kiseitze again, and then have in mind to be Yotzei then. But if in case that doesn't work out, when the Purim reading comes, which is going to be right after Parshas Zachor, if you're out of quarantine, so have in mind I'm fulfilling my mitzvah of Zechirat Amalek right now with this. We'll rely on the Magen Avram. It's not ideal, but we will rely on the Magen Avram in cases of duress when necessary. Coronavirus made all these shilas which no one ever thought we'd have very practical. So
and the minion issue is obviously fallen away also, right?
So the minion issue is followed, meaning we do try and hear it in shul. There are many poskim who say, let's say those who think women are chayavos. So if you go with Satmar, they're not going to have the Satmar women, filling up the shul to go and hear Parshas Zachor. They probably have like a little whole, whatever. There's different minhagim about. I'm saying whatever. Mechitzos are different things. They're high up. They've got all the kids. It's not shaykh for them to come to shul. So a lot of them will say, go home, read it out of a chumash or something like that. So in terms of the minyan, it's not clear that we require a minyan. Definitely l'chachila we do. Again, in cases of duress, we'll drop the minyan and we'll say, read maybe from a Torah scroll at home. If you don't have a Torah scroll, read from a chumash. So like there's the lechatchila and then there's all the levels below it, basically. Okay. Hopefully this year we won't have any problem being Yotze, but we hope. Fine. One last question I want to deal with, and this is the last topic we're going to discuss related to Parshas Zachor, which is how often do I need to fulfill this mitzvah on the level of Deoraisa, right? So let's drop what we know. We know that we read Parshas Zachor every year, once before Purim. I guess we also read it a second time when we learn Kiseitze automatically, just as the year goes by. But if I wanted to just fulfill my mitzvah on the level of Deoraisa, how often do I need to go ahead and read this text of Parshas Zachor? Right. So what would your starting point be? There's a mitzvah. It says go and remember something. So how often do I have to remember something?
It's a year.
You could say you have to remember it every day. Every day you have to remember it, but we read it once a year. Like we read it once a year to facilitate the daily remembering.
Okay, so I think I heard two answers. Joe, were you the other answer?
Yeah.
So Joe said once a year, and I think Steve just said every day, right? So what precedent do we have for every day, and what precedent do we have for every year? So let's just see some of the Makaros. It's really not so clear. It's really not so clear. If you look in source 11, we're gonna see a Joe Mehalach over here. It says the Rambam. It seems that a Joe Mehalach. V'chein mitzvos aseh. This is in Hilchos Malachim. La'bed zer Amalek. We have to go and destroy them. Shneimar timcha zecher Amalek. Right? Go and destroy Amalek. U'mitzvos aseh. A separate mitzvos aseh. Lizkor tamid ma'asav hara'im v'arivoso. You have to constantly remember their bad actions and their ambush. K'dei le'ora evoso, to go and generate our hatred towards them, etc. And he goes on to explain that tells you the mitzvah. So this language of the Rambam over here, mitzvah is called tamid. Why do you have to say the word tamid? You always constantly have to go and remember the zechira. So the Sefer Charedim, one of the I would say one of the more minor Rishonim, but nonetheless a Rishon, says based on this Rambam, when he spells out, it's its own Sefer HaMitzvos of sorts, he spells out in his Mitzvos Aseh Perek Dal, he says about Miloshen HaRambam Usmag Mashma Shemitzvah Zechira Bechol Yom, that the mitzvah of Zechira is to do so every single day. Every single day I have to tell myself, Amalek did some very bad things. Has anyone ever looked, I personally do not say it, but in the back of your siddur, not in the back of your siddur, but after Shacharis, so there's all these little the Sheish Zechiros, beautiful marks. I honestly don't even know what the Sheish Zechiros are. Maybe some people say it. Some people after davening they say a whole bunch of stuff.
Something about Shabbos and something about Miriam. Those are two.
Shabbos, Miriam, Man. One of them is Amalek. So a minhag developed to go and specifically say all of these zachiras. There's a bunch of zachiras in the Torah one. Remember what happened with Miriam. Remember what the Man. Remember Shabbos. So a minhag developed based on this charedim, which says you have to do so every single day based on the language of the Rambam. Say the parsha of Amalek every single day. At least say what Amalek did. I don't even know what the text of the Sheish Zachiras is. Again, if anyone looks in the back of a siddur, they could find it. I forgot to do so. But there are those who, because of this Rambam, because of Joe's point in the Sefer Charedim's point, go and read about what Amalek did to us every single day. Say again?
That was Steve's point. Steve Antisovsky.
Steve Antisovsky said, excuse me. Steve said it every day, and Joe said, I mixed you guys up. And Joe said once here. So Steve's point exactly that it is every day. So that's
but the reading, the technical reading is once a year. You know,
technical reading we do is once a year. So you have to figure out
to facilitate the remembering on a daily basis. You know what I'm saying?
Fine. So we'll see, you know, another approach in a moment as well. But just another point about this, which is there's a ton of mitzvos which the Torah doesn't tell us how often you have to do them. So for instance, tefillin never says how often you have to put them on. Nesias Kapayim, even in Israel, they do every day because the Rambam says you have a mitzvah every single day. Tefillah, we do every day. We assume midioraisa. The Rambam at least assumes midioraisa. You have to daven every day. The Torah never tells you a number. When you don't have a number, the go-to is to say every day. It seems like we have all these mitzvahs which the Torah doesn't tell you. We assume, okay, once a day. So it's very understandable that Zechiras Amalek would require something every day. Now, what Steve just said and what Joe said earlier is that, you know, you could have a Zechira once now. You could mention something now, and then I'm not going to forget for a very long time. So if we look in some of these other sources, which we have, not the Rambam, but the Sefer Achinuch says, he's not the only one, but he says, I'm just going to jump to the bold here because I see that we don't have so much time. But he says, "V'dai lanu bazeh lizkor ha'inyan pam achas b'shana or shtei shanim v'shalosh." It's sufficient if we just mention what happened with Amalek once a year, or maybe once every 2 years, or 3 years, right? So he's saying there's no specific time, once a year, once every 2 years. Maybe it depends how good your memory is. If you hear it once, maybe you've got a really good memory. You hear it once every 3 years, that'll be good enough. And he says, in fact, right? This is a very interesting line. In all of Klal Yisrael, we go through the entire Sefer Torah. How often? Either once a year or twice a year. Excuse me, once every year, once every 2 years, or once every 3 years, right? Because it used to be, we obviously finish the Torah every single year, but it used to be that there were two actual minhagim. One was to finish the Torah once a year, and one was that they had a triannual cycle that they would go through the whole Torah only every 3 years. Laning in shul was, much shorter. So you can understand why people would
shuls do that today. The shuls do the triennial cycle today.
Orthodox shuls, or you're saying
conservative shuls?
Yeah.
Shul down the block, it's triennial. I think they read the first third of all the parshas 1 year, the second third the second year. They keep up with
BJ does that.
Yeah, that's what I was saying. The shul up the block. So they keep up with the parshas, but just that we same parshas, just only read third.
I remember someone once pointed out that they're not really doing the same thing as they used to be doing in Eretz Yisrael, whatever. And the other minhag. The other minhag used to be we read the first third of the parsha this week, the second third of the parsha next week, the third third of the parsha the next week.
Really? Wow.
And what they ended up doing is they keep up with the parsha so that everyone's still, doing the same parsha, no matter which brand of Judaism you're part of. They're still keeping up with the same parsha that we have, but they're just doing the first third, the next one, the first third of the next one, etc. They're not doing quite the exact same thing, but it's that it is very interesting that they still do some form of they reinstituted the triannual completion of the Torah. But the Sefer Chinuch notes that there are two different minhagim about whether we finish every year or every 3 years. And that is sufficient to go and complete this mitzvah. And then he goes on and he says that the Shabbos before Purim, we actually read Parshas Zachor every single year. And that's really to go and make that, to emphasize that, for sure then every year is good enough. But the Sefer HaChinuch says it's not that there's some sort of specific number. It's not that once a year even. It's not that once every 1, 2, 3 years, however many years, just remember it. Right? And I think Steve was just raising that point that, okay, you have to remember it once so that you have to say it once so that you're constantly remembering. You mention it and then you remember, oh, there's the story of Amalek, which you're not going to forget. However, if you look in other Rishonim, the Rokeach, I don't think it's on the source sheet, and others, and they point out from the fact that there's a takana of Chazal to go and read Parshas Zachor every single year, it seems like the mitzvah is to do it every year, or at least that's how it was interpreted by Chazal, to go and remember it every single year. And even if you're not going to say,
how do you know it's not once in a lifetime?
Right, how do you know it's not once in a lifetime? So how many mitzvot? That's a good question. How many mitzvot do you have once in a lifetime? There's probably a few.
Brit Milah, hopefully.
Brit Milah, right? So that could just be because, it could be that it's impossible to do more. It's a state of being. Once you have that state of being, so you're good to go, right? Or maybe another one is like writing a Sefer Torah, which is a mitzvah which, I don't know too many people who have actually fulfilled, but in theory, we're all supposed to write our own Sefer Torah. So you don't need to write more than one, but you have to own it, right? If people write a Sefer Torah for themselves and they give it away, then they actually have to, it's a discussion in the Achronim, but I think that that in theory, we'd say you have to write another one. You have to have a Sefer Torah which you wrote. So you have to be mahul, you have to have a milah. But also maybe just another point about Amalek is if you just did something once in your whole lifetime, you probably wouldn't remember it so well 10 years down the line. Maybe some people would, but I know I wouldn't, right? If I remembered everything I ever learned, I'd be doing very well. But a whole slew of Rishonim say that the mitzvah midioraita is once a year. And even if that's not the case, at least Chazal said, you know what, we are establishing that you have to hear this every single year.
How did I put in or add or subtract the reading in Bishalach?
Say again, I didn't understand your question.
You say it's only once a year, but we say the same thing in Bishalach.
Right, you're saying we go through all the
more
Parshas
than once a year.
And Parshas Zachor, you're saying besides.
It's just once a year. You could still read it other times. That doesn't negate, the explanation that it's the mitzvah is once a year.
Yeah, but we're doing it more than once a year.
No, right. Not. No, we don't say it's not a mitzvah. It's not. You're not. We just say you're not mekayim the mitzvah in B'shalach. Only in an emergency. You're mekayim the mitzvah Parshas Zachor. I mean, you could read it other times too. It doesn't. There's no harm in it.
How did the Chazal differentiate between the Sheish Zechirot? Like some of them are real mitzvot to remember. Like it says Yetziat Mitzrayim is one, and Zechirah Shabbos, and some of them like Miriam, or Zechirah Maseh Ego, we never fulfill. Right.
I don't know. I saw that the Torah T'mima raises that point. The Torah T'mima asks why we emphasize certain ones and not other ones. If it's really one big, I think it was a Sifrei, which puts all of them together. And then Chazal and the Rishonim kind of emphasize some over the other. Some of them make it into the Gemara and some of them don't. Torah T'mima asked the question. I didn't see an answer to exactly what that answer is.
It's more than emphasized. It's actual. Some are actual mitzvot, and some just don't exist as a mitzvot.
Right, meaning that they paskin that they're mitzvot. I mean, the Sifrei says all of these are mitzvot, just to clarify. And then the Rambam paskin some of them because only some of them made it into the Gemara. The Gemara is quoting this brisa, which is from a Sifrei, I think. And then because the Gemara only quotes bits of it, so then only those end up becoming mitzvot in the Rishonim. So Torah T'mima just says, I don't understand what happened here.
They all made it into the city somehow.
Yeah, so I'm not sure. So where does 1 year come from? We'll just do outside because it's 8:45. the Chasam Sofer notes that in Avelus, what we say is that it's not even in this little quote of the Chasam Sofer, but in Avelus we say that after 12 months, so that's when after 12 months is when Shichachas Hames occurs. Now, it doesn't really mean forgetting. Obviously, people don't forget their lost relatives, but there's a certain level of forgetfulness which occurs after 12 months have passed. He says, so that's what Chazal were based on, that idea that after 12 months, there's a certain level of Shichacha. That same idea is what's being applied to Parshas Zachor, that Chazal said 12 months is the amount of time it takes for people to have a certain level of forgetfulness, and therefore they instituted that you have to go ahead and do it, that you have to go and read it once every 12 months. There was the Chasam Sofer's Talmud, the Maram Shik, testifies that the Chasam Sofer, when it was a leap year, right? What happens on a leap year? Now you have a 13th month. You have a 13th month. Oh my gosh, I'm not going to necessarily remember. 12 months are going to pass. Chasam Sofer would make sure to read it to himself an extra time, just to make sure 12 months wouldn't pass. No one paskins that that's necessary. They point out that this happens all the time, even without a leap year. If there's 12 months, the way Parshas Zachor works out, it's always on a Shabbos. So it could be that it's 12 months and a few days, depending on one year and the next. So it's an interesting idea based on the Chasam Sofer's assumption that you should go and read it an extra time if 12 months pass. But I don't think that is, I know that's not the accepted practice. So we'll end there. We'll pick up with Tainus Esther, non-Parshas Zachor stuff next week. Happy to take any questions or comments.
See, I just think the mitzvah of Zechira, like when I think of Zechira, to remember, it's a continuous thing. It's an inherently continuous commandment. It's not like a particular time. It's a continuous concept when you're commanded to remember something forever.
But I think you're right. Meaning that's why, so you read it once that's what the Sefer Chinuch I think is coming from. You read it once or twice or once every 1 or 2 or 3 years. The whole point is just to have a continuous memory. I don't need to constantly say it, but I need to constantly remember it. And that's where the Sefer Chinuch seems to be coming from.
So we could never fulfill the mitzvah of Mechias Amalek, presumably.
Right. I would have a tougher share if I tried to prepare one on Mechias Amalek than on Zechiras Amalek. Look, there's all these Achronim plug in like what is Amalek nowadays, right? We can't identify Amalek. We have no idea who Amalek is. Rav Soloveitchik said that the Germans in World War II were Amalek, and I don't know. The Germans during World War II were Amalek, and you'd have right. You say for sure, but that's still a chiddush. For sure, they were terrible, and we should kill them as being rodfim. But to say they have a halachic status of Amalek, you
could say that Amalek is not a particular genetic people, but rather they are people that want to destroy us. They become Amalek. They're given the halachic status of Amalek.
Right. I think that's what the Rav Soloveitchik was assuming. It's not in Rishonim. Like the Rishonim don't say if you have, in the time of the Crusades, these people now have the status of Amalek. Like no one said that until it's a more recent concept, which might be true, but it's still a chiddush, just if you go through our sources, that it's not the progeny of actual Amalek that we can just change that status and put it on whoever's trying to attack and kill us like Amalek did to us.
And also one more thing, like if you're saying that the mitzvah of Zechira is totally embedded in Timcha, like the whole reason for it is for Timcha. If there is no Timcha today, then wouldn't that reduce the mitzvah of the Zechira then? Like wouldn't that, you could argue maybe it's not even a Doraisa anymore.
Right. My wife was telling me, I don't think she'd mind me sharing this, but she said she's got some friends who aren't Jewish, and I was telling her I was preparing a mitzvah shir on Zechiras Amalek, and she said, "How do we know that like our friends aren't descendants of Amalek?" I was like, "I guess we don't. We don't. Amalek still exists. Whatever. They just don't have they don't have, we can't identify them. Presumably their descendants weren't wiped out, so they're somewhere. I don't know. I'll let Eliyahu and Mashiach figure out exactly how we take care of this one, because I'm not getting involved in wiping out.
So same with the Amor Moab. The world was mixed up. We don't know who anyone comes from.
Right, but they still exist, right? It's not that there is no.
But if you don't know who they are, you can't kill them. So.
100%. No. I want to make it clear. I'm absolutely not advocating killing of anyone. Don't misquote me on this one. I'm just saying I don't really understand what the mitzvah is currently, what the mitzvah is going to be. I hope it's going to be some sort of non-literal, I don't know, metaphorical something application. I mentioned in the last year that the whole mitzvah is like hashkafically difficult, not just for me, but for many people. Like, because not to minimize what they did to us, but Amalek attacked us way back when, thousands of years ago. Now, if we knew a descendant who was a really nice person, and would do chasadim for the Jewish community, so we have a mitzvah to wipe them out. Like, it's hard to swallow, to say the least. So, what to think about? That was why we did a shir on Zechiras Amalek and not Mechias Amalek, but maybe next time. All right, Kol Tov, everyone. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you very much.
So next week we're not doing Amalek anymore.
No, so next week, so what we're doing is we're doing mitzvos and Adar, basically. So this is, I think, all we're gonna do on Parshas Zachor. We could do another show on Parshas Zachor, but I think it's probably kedai to move on. Tainus Esther happens to be a very interesting minhag or fast, however you want to look at it. We'll see that, and then we'll probably get into Purim stuff after that. All right.
Okay.
Kol Tov.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, Rabbi. Thank you.
Absolutely. Great to see everyone.